Masechta Yomא, Perek Beis, Mishnah Aleph. As a continuation of the last mission of the previous Perek, this Perek begins with the sugya of Trumas Hadeshen, which is separating the ashes from the Mizbeach. Out of the many Kehanim that did the Avodah each day, one was selected to do this Avodah. The second Mishnah of this Perek says that the selection was made with a payas, a lottery. Starting with its discussion of this payas, this Perek departs on the main topic of the Masechta, which is the Kohen Gadol's Avodah in Yom Kippur, and deals with general matters of the payas that were held in the Beis HaMikdash to determine which Kehanim performed the various Avodas of each day. The Perek does not pertain particularly to Yom Kippur, when no method of selection was necessary, because all the services of Yom Kippur were performed by the Kohen Gadol, as we mentioned in the beginning of Perek Aleph. It refers to all the other Shin Samach Dalet days of the year where the Satan has the power a little bit, when ordinary Kehanim were chosen to carry out the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. The Ramban here holds that the Kohen Gadol did not perform all the avodas in Yom Kippur, rather some were done by Kohen Hedyot as well. The Trumas Hadeshen was done by Kohen Hedyot. According to this, the payas was needed on Yom Kippur as well to figure out who would do the Trumas Hadeshen. So let's see what the Mishnah says. Bari Shaina, at first, and Kal Mi Sharayta Litrei Mitzamizbeach Terem, any Kohen. This refers to any Kohen from the family of Kehanim who were on duty that day, who wanted to any Kohen who wanted to separate the ashes from the Mizbeach, separated it. It was Manche and Meruben, and when there were many Kohanim who wanted to perform this Avodah Rotan V'Elam Bakevesh, they ran up the ramp of the Mizbeach, which was 32 amas long, so it was 64 feet be'erech on an angle upwards. And whoever came before any of his fellow Kohanim to the final Dalet amas of the ramp won the right to separate the ashes. Some kind of race. If two of them were tied, the appointed Kohen that was in charge of them for that week or that mishmar says, put out your fingers. The Kohanim would stand in a circle and each would put out a finger. The official Kohen, this Mamuna, announced a random number that was much higher than the number of Kohanim. Then starting with one Kohen, he went several times around the circle counting the fingers. The Kohen with whom the count ended won this payas. It's also to count Yidden, so their fingers were counted instead. Right? That's where it comes from. You count the yarmulkes, you count noses, you count shoes. You don't count the actual people. All the Kehanim joined in the lottery rather than just the two who tied in the race, because the results would be a foregone conclusion were just two Kehanim to participate. If an odd number was chosen, then one with whom the count begins would obviously win, and with an even number is chosen, the other one would obviously win as well. What number of fingers would the Kohen put out? One if the Kohen was healthy, and two if he couldn't extend one finger without the other next to it. In this case, two fingers were counted as one. However, the thumb was not allowed to be put out for the payas in the Beis HaMikdash, because the Kohen could cheat by putting out a thumb and another finger and spreading them so far apart that they would be counted as two. When a Kohen sees that the number will fall on the Kohen after him, he would cheat by putting on his thumb in addition to the other finger, so that the number will fall on him instead. This was a problem only when one of the two fingers is a thumb, because the thumb can be extended far enough in the other finger to appear as though it belongs to the other person. The Chachamim therefore asser putting out a thumb even on its own. Any other finger, however, is going to be mutter. Mishnah Beis. The story was that two Kehanim were tied as they were running up the ramp. One of them pushed the other one, who fell and broke his leg. Once Bezdin saw that the Kehanim were putting in danger by having this race, they were geyser, they were masakin, that one may not separate the ashes from the Mizbeach unless he has been selected by the lottery, and the race was abolished. And the Gemara is married with other such stories where someone, guy got upset, one Kohen got upset at another one and stabbed him. And the father told him to quickly take out the knives and not to be metame the azara. Arba paises hayusham. There were 4 lotteries held there in the Beis HaMikdash for every day, for the daily avoid in the Beis HaMikdash. And this one, which selected the Kohen who separated the ashes, was the first of the 4. And the Hemshech HaMishnayos will teach which avodas were awarded at each of the remaining 3 lotteries. The Kohen did not hold all 4 lotteries at one gathering. Rather, they gathered 4 different times, once for each lottery, because every time the sound of a large crowd assembling in the Beis HaMikdash is heard, it's the covet for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, V'zehu Kvodo Shel Melech, The Rav brings the Gemara. Shenema bebeis elikim nahalich beragesh. We'll be meragesh the matzav. We'll make some noise. We'll be mechazik. To make a matzav in the Beis Hamikdash. Mishnah Gimel. Hapayis Hasheni, the second lottery determined Mishaychit, who shechts the Karban Tamid, although you didn't need a Kayin. Mizayrik, who throws its dam against the side of the Mizbeach. The Kayin who threw the dam of the Tamid against the Mizbeach also performed the Kabbalah Sadam, when he caught the dam in a bowl. After catching the dam, he carried the bowl, he did Halacha, and then he was Zayrik the dam. The two Kabbalas were brought every day, one in the morning and one in the evening. Whichever kind won the right to perform a particular avodah with the morning avodah, performed the same avodah in the Talmud Shal Ben Harbayim. The same rule applies to most of the other karbanas of the avodas that were repeated in the afternoon. If a person, let's say, it was his turn to do the menorah, so he would do it in the afternoon as well. Mi Medash Mizbeach HaPnimi, who clears the ashes of the previous day's ketores from the Mizbeach ketores inside the Heichal. Mi Medash Menorah, who clears the ashes from the menorah, Mimale Varm Lakevesh, who carries the limbs of the Tamid up the ramp of the Mizbeach and places them on the ramp. At this time, we mentioned earlier that the Ivarim were put down on the ramp below its midpoint, and they were later carried to the top of the Mizbeach and thrown into the fire. The limbs were divided into 6 parts, each carried by a different kohen. Harosh v'haregel, the head and the back right leg. The head must be brought first, because the Torah mentions the head explicitly in connection with the Sreifa on the Mizbeach. However, the head on its own is not a respectable portion because it's full of bones and contains very little meat. It must therefore be accompanied by one of the back legs, which are the meatiest part of the animal. Of the 2 back legs, the right is used because the Torah generally favors the right over the left. The order of the portions corresponds to the relative size, with the larger ones preceding the smaller ones. So then you have a Rosh Regel, Shtei Hayadayim, the 2 front legs, Uketz v'haregel, the tail along with the hindquarters and the back left leg, Hachazav ha'agera, the chest and the neck, Ushtei atfanis, the 2 sides of the animal, Hakurvayim, the kishkis v'asailas. The pious also determined who carries the flour up to the ramp, the Karban Mincha that's brought together with the Karban Tamid, and the Chavitin. The Chavitin are the Kohen Gadol's Mincha that was brought every single day. Although the Chavitin were mechuyev, was done, but it was l'chayra chiva the Kohen Gadol. Any Kohen could bring it to the Mizbeach and burn it as a shlichus of the Kohen Gadol Hayayin, and who carries the wine that was poured onto the Mizbeach when the Tamid is brought. Shleish also Kahanim Zochabai, in total 13 Kahanim on the right to perform the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash in the Payis Hasheni. The 13 services avodas are: number 1 shchita, number 2 is rika, number 3 is cleaning the menorah, number 4 is cleaning the Mizbeach HaPnimi, number 4 is the menorah. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are carrying the 6 sections of the Tamid up to the ramp. Number 11 is carrying the mincha of the Tamid. Number 12 is the chavitin, and number 13 is the wine. This one lottery selected Kehanim for all these 13 avodas as follows: the Kohen with whom the count ended would throw the Tamid's dam on the Mizbeach, because that's the most important avodah. The Kohen to his right would check the Tamid, and the one to his right would do the Dishun Mizbeach HaPnimi, and the one on his right would do the menorah, and they would go around those 13 from the first one who the number landed on, and 13 that followed. Omar ben Azai lefnei Rabbi Kiva mishum Rabbi Shua. Ben Azai said before Rabbi Kiva the name Rabbi Shua. Derech hilucha ha'akar. The order in which the Talmud was brought corresponds to the way it walked when it was alive. First the head, together with the back right leg, then the chest and the neck, then the 2 front legs, then the 2 sides, then the tail and the back left leg. Ben Azai doesn't mention the kishkis, since the kishkis cannot move on their own, but are only together with the animal. He agrees that they're brought last. Okay. Mishnah Daled. Hapayis Hashlishi. The third lottery was conducted as follows. Chadashim Lakteris Bayu Vahafisu. The appointed official, the Memuna, announced that those are new to the avodah of being Makter Kteras come and participate in the pious. This lottery was open only to Kohanim who had never done the Kteras before in their lives, and not to those who had already done so. What's the pshat? Because the Torah implies that a Kohen who burns the Kteras is blessed with Hashirus. The Chachamim were therefore gazed that a Kohen who had already performed this avodah may not do it again. Rather, he must make way for someone else, so that as many Kohanim as possible are given the chance to offer the Kteris and receive its bracha. This is where, there's a whole shmuez about the sandik by bris is like Ashirus. But the Mefarshim explained that it means Ashirus of Ruchnius, not Ashirus of Gashmius. because the Chazam Sofer says that there were many people who were that acted as sandik and they didn't get any ashirus, so the ashirus is nor given in yonam ruchniim, not in yonam gashmiim. All right, weiter. Varavi. The fourth lottery was conducted as follows: Chadashim im Yeshanim. The Mamuna announced that those who are new come together with those that are experienced already. Since the previous pious was closed to those who had already done the Ketores, the Mamuna now made it clear that this lottery is open to everyone. This lottery selected the Kohen who brought the Evarim of the Talmud up from the ramp and tosses them onto the fire of the Mizbeach. As we mentioned earlier, the Evarim were first placed on the lower part of the Kevesh, and the Kohen then carried them to the top and threw them into the fire. The reason for this division is to have more people participate in the Avodah. The more people who serve Hashem, the greater is His glory, Berevam Hadras Melech. Nevertheless, although 6 Kohanim carried the Evarim to the lower half of the Mizbeach, only one Kohen took them from there and threw them into the fire. Mishnah Hey. Talmud Karev B'Tisha. The Talmud was sometimes offered by 9 Kohanim. Ba'asara, sometimes with 10. Ba'achar, sometimes with 11. Mishnah Masa, sometimes even with 12. Le'pachas v'le'yosef, but there were never fewer than 9, and never more than 12 Kohanim that were involved in the avodah of being makar of the Talmud. Kate said, how was this so? Atzmai B'Tisha. The Talmud itself was offered by 9 Kohanim. 6 carried parts of the animal, 1 carried the chavitin, 1 carried the mincha, and 1 carried the wine. This is the basic number of Kohanim required to offer the Talmud each morning. B'chag, but on the Yom Tov of Sukkot, b'yarechot tzloiches shel mayim, one additional Kohen had a flask of water in his hand, which he carried to the Mizbeach, and the water was poured on the Mizbeach for Nisach HaMayim. Harek HaNasara, so that's why you have 10. Beinu Arbayim, V'achar Asrei. The afternoon Talmud was offered on an ordinary day by 11 Kohanim. Who Atzma B'Tisha? The Talmud itself was carried by 9 Kohanim, as we mentioned earlier. Ushnayim b'yodam shnei gizrei eitzim. Plus 2 Kohanim who had 2 blocks of wood in their hands. Each Kohen carried 1 block to the Mizbeach and put it on the pile of firewood in preparation for the Tam Shal Bein Rabbayim. Now, this was done in the morning as well for the Tam Shal Shachar. However, it's not included here since we mentioned earlier that the Mefarshim explained that the Mishnah doesn't deal with the avodas performed before the Evarim were taken to the Mizbeach. The wood that was used for the Tam Shal Bein Rabbayim are included because this wood was placed on the Kevesh after the Evarim of the Tam Shal Bein Rabbayim was placed there. That's why it is counted by the Tam Shal Bein Rabbayim, but not by the Tam Shal Shachar. It's just Hanta Zach. B'Shabbos b'Acharosar, on Shabbos the carbon Tam Shal Shachar was carried by 11 Kohanim. Who Atzma B'Tisha, the Talmud itself is carried by 9. Ushnayim b'Yodam shnei b'Zdicha Levayna Shalachem Apanim. Plus 2 Kohanim who had 2 ladles of Levayna in their hands, 1 ladle carried by each Kohen, which was burned on the Mizbeach. What's this about? Every Shabbos, 2 ladles of Levayna, which is frankincense, is the sap of a certain tree, were put on the table in the Beis Hamikdash together with the Lechem Apanim. The Levayna and the Lechem Apanim remained on the table until the morning of the next Shabbos, until the Levayna was burned on the Mizbeach, and the bread, which always remained fresh, b'derech neis, was given out to the Kohanim. Ub'Shabbos Shabbosei Chachag, b'yarechot tzloiches shel mayim. On a Shabbos that fell during the Yom Tov of Sukkot, besides the 11 Kohanim of the ordinary Shabbos morning, one also carried a flask of water in his hand as required on every day of Sukkot for a total of 12 Kohanim, so that you have 12. So Pesach, there's no special karbanos involved in the Talmud. Now, although every Yom Tov has its special karbanos, but it didn't add to the actual Talmud. As well as Shavuos, although they brought the Shtei Lechem with a Shalmei Tzibur that came together with that, also did not add to the actual carbon Talmud. Mishnah Vav. Ayil Karev b'Achar Asar, Habasa b'Chamisha, Hakravayim b'Aselos, V'Yayin b'Shnayim Shnayim. The Talmud belongs to the category of karbanos known as oila. However, the Talmud had to be a lamb. For other karbanos oila, certain other animals could be used as well. The following two Mishnayos count the number of Kohanim needed to offer to be makriv a ram or a bull as a carbon oila. So an Ayl Kar B'Acharasar, a ram was brought as an oil offering by 11 Kohanim as follows. Habasar B'Chamisha. All the limbs except for the kishkas were carried by 5 Kohanim, just like the Basar Hatamid. Hakravayim V'Aselis V'Hayayin B'Shnayim Shnayim. But the kishkas, the flour and the wine, were each carried by 2 Kohanim, unlike the Tamid, which is a lamb, where each was carried by 1 Kohen. This is because the kishkas of a ram are bigger and are heavier than those of a lamb, and the amounts of flour and wine brought with a ram are larger than those that are brought with a lamb. Asira Sa'efa and Reviya Sehin were brought together with a lamb when you have 2/10 of an ephah of flour, and a Shlisha Sehin Yayin were brought together with the ayil. Okay. Mishnah Zayin. Par Karet Be'eser Mi'arba. A bull which is larger than a ram was brought by 24 Kohanim. Harosh V'Regel, Harosh Be'echad V'Regel B'Shnayim. There were 3 Kohanim that took the Reish and the Regel. The head and the back right leg were carried as follows. The head by 1 Kohen, and the leg by 2. Ha'ukitz v'haregel. Ha'ukitz b'shnayim v'haregel b'shnayim. The tail with the hindquarters and the back left leg were carried as follows. The tail was carried by 2 Kohanim, and the leg was carried by 2 also. Ha'chozav ha'gera, ha'chozav ha'echad by gera b'shleisha. The chest and the neck were carried as follows. The chest by 1 Kohen, and the neck by 3. Shtei yadayim b'shnayim. The 2 front legs were carried by 2 Kohanim. The 2 sides by 2 Kohanim. The innards, the flour, and the wine were carried by 3 Kohanim each. The 3/10 of an ephah of flour and chatzi hahin yayin were brought together with a par. These amounts are much larger than those for a lamb or a ram, for a keves or for an ayil. Bamedbar mamurim, what are we talking about? When were these numbers of Kohanim necessary? B'karbonos tzibur. In the case of communal oil offerings, but in the case of personal oil offering, if one Kohen wanted to bring the entire carbon by himself, he may bring it. However, the skinning and their carving, meaning cutting up the animal, is the same for both these and those, for karbonos yachid and for karbonos tzibur, and that they may be done by a non-Kohen. Ad kan, Hemshech Yavai, Perek Gimel.